December 16th, 1944. Ardennes Forest, Belgium. 05:30 hours. The woods were silent under a heavy ceiling of snow-laden clouds. A bitter wind clawed through the trees, carrying the metallic tang of ice and gun oil. American sentries stood in their foxholes, boots half frozen, weapons slung low, convinced that winter had sealed the front into stagnation. The Ardennes was known as a quiet sector, a place where exhausted divisions were sent to rest. Within minutes, that illusion would collapse. From the foggy darkness came a sound, dull, rolling thunder, spreading across the horizon like an earthquake. It was not weather. It was the first salvo of one of the largest artillery barrages of the war. German 105S, 150S, and massive 210mm guns roared alive, their shells screaming over the forest. Earth heaved upward. Trees splintered into flying spears. Men were buried alive in their own dugouts. The quiet sector had become an inferno. The Wehrmacht had launched Operation Wacht am Rhein, a desperate gamble to split the Allied front, capture Antwerp, and strangle the Western advance. Over 200,000 German troops, 1,000 tanks, and waves of artillery had been hidden in the forest, unseen by Allied reconnaissance. At this hour, the deception revealed itself in fire. American positions buckled. Outposts were shredded. Communication lines were cut before many units could even respond. Young GIs, many untested in combat, clawed at frozen earth for cover, their rifles clattering against the lip of foxholes. Panic cut through the dawn as entire sections of the front went dark. By mid-morning, the fog thickened, grounding Allied aircraft. This weather was no accident. It was part of the German plan. Without air superiority, the U.S. Army would fight blind. Armor units tried to reposition, but icy roads and broken bridges slowed every movement. German tanks, Panthers, and Tigers crept forward through forest tracks, their engines muffled by snow. To many American soldiers, the first warning of armor was the grinding sound of steel treads on ice. Behind the guns, German infantry surged. Camouflaged in white smocks, they ghosted through the trees, rifles ready, determined to overwhelm the thin American lines. The 106th Infantry Division, new to the front and spread dangerously wide, absorbed the first crushing blow. Entire regiments were thrown into chaos. For the Americans, the battle was not yet fully understood. Reports filtered through field radios in broken bursts. Enemy armor spotted, lines collapsing, need reinforcements. Command posts scrambled to piece together the scale of the assault, but geography and weather conspired against them. The Ardennes was a nightmare of dense woods, narrow valleys, and twisting roads. Perfect terrain for an ambush on this scale. Logistics turned critical in the first hours. Ammunition stocks were low in the forward units. Fuel supplies were vulnerable, stored in depots far behind the lines. Every shell, every gallon of gasoline suddenly became the difference between resistance and annihilation. Engineers rushed to secure bridges before German panzers could overrun them. By noon, some American positions had already been obliterated, reduced to silent patches of churned snow and burning wreckage. Others held grimly, trading fire until weapons froze or men collapsed. The brutality of winter fused with the violence of war. Rifle bolts, jammed with ice, blood froze on clothing. Wounded men died before medics could reach them. The first prisoners began to fall into German hands. Stunned and frostbitten, they were herded back through the woods, their disbelief plain. They had been told this sector was safe. Instead, they were the opening casualties of the greatest German offensive on the Western Front. And yet, amid the devastation, pockets of American resistance refused to yield. Machine gun nests hammered back at advancing columns. Mortar teams fired until their tubes glowed red. Scattered platoons withdrew to higher ground, buying precious time. It was not enough to stop the onslaught, but it was enough to delay it. That delay, though unseen in the chaos, would matter. As evening fell, the forest glowed with burning timber and shattered vehicles. Snow mixed with smoke, turning the sky a sickly gray. The German advance pressed deeper, widening the cracks in the Allied line. American divisions to the north and south were being forced into retreat, their flanks exposed. The entire sector teetered on collapse. The Battle of the Bulge had begun, not as a gradual push, but as an eruption of fire and steel that threatened to consume the American front. The men who survived the first day understood only one thing: survival itself was now uncertain. As night closed over the Ardennes, convoys of German armor pushed westward. American units reeled back, scrambling to form a new line. The next phase would not be a stand. It would be a retreat under fire. By the early hours of December 17th, the scale of the German offensive became brutally apparent. The Ardennes had never been designed to absorb an assault of this magnitude. Thin formations of the 106th Infantry Division, patched with remnants of the 28th and 9th Armored Divisions, stretched across ridge lines and snowbound villages. Gaps between positions were vast, disguised only by frost-covered trees and shallow foxholes. Mines were sparse, too few to halt advancing armor. German forces struck with precision. The 6th Panzer Army pressed the northern flank, SS divisions spearheading attacks with Tiger IIs and Panthers, their treads grinding through the ice. The 5th Panzer Army drove through the central valleys toward Saint-Vith, exploiting every weakness. In the south, elements of the 7th Army probed defenses to pin down American reserves. Every mile mattered. Every crossroads was a battleground. American soldiers clung desperately to outposts, trading fire until overrun. Wire communications were severed by artillery, leaving field radios struggling to transmit static-laden commands. Bazooka teams waited in ditches, firing at silhouettes that melted into the fog. Where resistance faltered, German armor crushed positions. Where it held, every shot counted. In the Schnee-Eifel, entire regiments of the 106th were trapped, encircled within hours. Thousands faced annihilation or surrender. Elsewhere, the 28th Infantry Division attempted to stem the tide in Luxembourg villages. Companies barely 50 men strong defended houses, room by room, only to be forced back by flamethrowers or grenades. Civilians fled, dragging families through the snow. By mid-morning, smoke rose from countless chimneys. Roads were blocked by abandoned vehicles. Each village lost slowed German progress, but exacted a steep price in lives. Engineers became frontline heroes and expendables. Bridges over the Our and Clariff rivers were wired for demolition. Some charges fired too early or too late, sending debris into ice-choked waters. Others detonated perfectly, crushing armor and vehicles. Each bridge destroyed bought hours of delay. Yet every intact crossing allowed German columns to surge forward relentlessly. Winter compounded the struggle. Supplies dwindled. Fuel, already rationed, could not reach forward units. Men huddled in thin jackets, frostbite gnawing at fingers and toes. K-rations, meant for weeks, ran out in days. Snow and ice became as lethal as bullets. Exhaustion, hunger, and cold thinned ranks faster than the enemy. By the end of December 16th and into the 17th, the thin American line was no longer continuous. Fractured companies clung to positions where they could. Others disappeared into the woods. Gaps widened. Commanders faced impossible choices. Attempt a tactical withdrawal, risking encirclement, or hold to buy time for reinforcements still days away. Either path carried fatal risk. Despite the chaos, every small resistance counted. Delays in the German timetable meant the 7th Armored and 101st Airborne could begin moving toward key crossroads. Each unit holding a ridge, each demolished bridge, each Sherman sacrificed in a choke point contributed to the larger strategy. It was a war of inches where survival and tactical delay were intertwined. The Ardennes had transformed overnight from a quiet sector to America's most critical battlefield. The thin line of defense was fragile, yet it held the first threads of hope, the first moments that might allow the tide to turn. As fog rolled in and snowstorm clouds thickened, American commanders braced for the next test. German armor would not wait. The battle for control of roads, villages, and survival itself was just beginning. December 17th, 1944. Ardennes Forest, Belgium. The Ardennes remained a frozen labyrinth of narrow roads, steep ridges, and dense pine forests. Thick fog hung low over the valleys, masking movement, muffling distant artillery, and transforming the landscape into a spectral battlefield. For American units clinging to crossroads, bridges, and farmhouses, the sound of gears grinding and tank treads crunching snow heralded the full weight of the German advance. Engineers worked feverishly to slow the assault. Bridges were wired with explosives, detonated under withering rifle and machine gun fire. In some cases, charges went off too late, shredding timber just as German armor arrived, forcing men to leap aside to survive. Other demolitions failed entirely, leaving crossings intact and allowing panzers to press forward. Every delay mattered. Every action was a gamble with death. The roads to St. Vith became choke points. Elements of the 7th Armored Division and scattered anti-tank companies set up ambushes. Shermans crouched behind snowbanks, engines idling, waiting for the fog to lift enough to expose targets. Massive tigers and panthers rolled into view, armored silhouettes impervious at range. American gunners fired anyway, hoping for tracks, hatches, or exposed flanks. In the confined Ardennes roads, even a single disabled tank could stall an entire column. Fog hampered artillery. Forward observers could not spot targets. Shells fell wide, striking empty fields or already wrecked villages. Air reconnaissance remained grounded, leaving higher command blind to the scale of the assault. Many commanders still believed the attacks were raids, not a coordinated three-army offensive. In truth, German armored columns and infantry divisions stretched across the Ardennes, advancing under a gray cloak of concealment. Infantry bore the brunt of this hidden advance. Patrols vanished in the trees. Outposts were bypassed, then encircled, with survivors emerging hours later as prisoners. Machine gun nests fought until their barrels glowed, only to be flanked and overwhelmed. German troops exploited American uniforms and captured vehicles, sowing confusion along every road. Civilians experienced the advance as sudden and absolute. Convoys retreating west 1 hour were replaced the next by German armor. Officers barked orders, soldiers seized food and shelter, and families fled into cellars. As firefights erupted outside, American units were disoriented, sometimes stumbling into enemy positions by mistake, cutting off their own supply lines. Yet each delay mattered. Every demolished bridge, every stalled Sherman, every destroyed truck bought precious minutes. Higher command could shift reserves, beginning to form defensive lines around critical junctions like Bastogne and Saint-Vith. The fog, while concealing the enemy, forced the Germans to advance more cautiously than they intended. By evening, the Ardennes was a storm of steel under gray skies. American troops, thinly spread and battered, were not holding a line. They were trading space for time, each position swallowed only after desperate resistance. The fury of the German advance was visible, but its fragility remained hidden by fog and snow. As the second night fell, frostbite, exhaustion, and hunger began to sap the American strength. Commanders knew the coming days would test not only their fighting skills, but their ability to survive the winter onslaught in the Ardennes. December 18th, 1944. Ardennes Forest, Belgium. By the third day of the German offensive, the Americans faced a relentless enemy and a merciless winter. Temperatures plunged well below freezing. Snowdrifts reached chest height in some areas. Winds cut through thin autumn uniforms, turning them into ineffective barriers. Many troops had been rushed to the front with minimal winter gear. Worn boots, single blankets, and jackets that offered almost no protection. Frostbite spread quickly, blackening toes and stiffening fingers. Faces blistered, ears swelled. Medics improvised. Socks became gloves, newspapers stuffed into boots, morphine rationed so sparingly that wounded soldiers endured agony through the night. Hunger compounded suffering. Supply lines were disrupted or destroyed. Units went days without resupply, chewing frozen bread and boiling snow for water. Cigarettes became currency, traded for bites of food. Soldiers' bodies burned calories faster than rations could replace them. Exhaustion followed. Foxholes filled with slush, blankets froze stiff, rifles clutched like talismans against the cold. Any fire risked drawing German artillery, so men shivered silently. Survival depended on movement, shared body heat, and scavenging from abandoned packs or ruined homes. Weapons themselves became part of the struggle. Rifles jammed, machine guns froze, and tank engines struggled to turn over. Tracks locked in ice, immobilizing armored vehicles until thawed by force. Mortars misfired, shells falling short and endangering crews. Every tool demanded endurance as much as skill. The cold reshaped tactics and morale. Soldiers marched until collapsing into snowbanks, unable to rise. Letters later recovered described numbness creeping up legs, a chilling companion to artillery and bullets. Frostbite claimed more casualties than firefights in some regiments. The German advance, fueled by captured supplies and momentum, did not face these immediate shortages. For the Americans, winter itself had become an enemy. By nightfall on December 18th, entire battalions were half strength, not from combat, but from exposure, hunger, and fatigue. Officers knew retreat could not outrun the storm. Reinforcements remained miles away. The question had shifted, not whether Americans could fight, but whether they could survive the Ardennes long enough to fight at all. With soldiers weakened by frost and hunger, the first towns along the German route began to fall. Each village would test American resolve and exact a steep toll in both lives and time. December 18th, 1944. Ardennes Forest, Belgium. The German advance cut a path of fire and steel through the Ardennes, transforming quiet villages into deadly obstacles. Clairvaux, Wiltz, and Houffalize became frontline outposts overnight. Their narrow streets and stone houses quickly turned into battlefields. Each town delayed the enemy, but at a crushing cost. Clairvaux held first. Elements of the 110th Infantry Regiment resisted nearly 2 days under constant artillery and tank fire. Bazooka teams fired from cellars and windows, hoping to pierce armor that crushed walls with ease. Civilians huddled in churches as shells tore through roofs. As ammunition ran low, American squads retreated street by street, covering one another with rifles stiff from cold. The 2nd Panzer Division's timetable was delayed, but hundreds of U.S. soldiers had died, been captured, or vanished into the woods. Wiltz followed. The 28th Infantry Division fought until surrounded. Houses became strong points. Machine guns rattled through alleys. Mortars reduced entire blocks to rubble. Civilians fled, carts piled high, clashing with retreating convoys. Flames lit the afternoon sky, signaling the town's capture. German forces pressed onward, leaving behind smoldering ruins and frozen bodies. Hufalies mirrored the pattern. Scattered defenders fought until tanks crushed their foxholes beneath treads. Trucks and jeeps abandoned along narrow streets blocked movement, forcing attackers to maneuver carefully. American losses mounted, but each hour of resistance disrupted German momentum. The pattern repeated across dozens of hamlets. While the defenders were ultimately overwhelmed, every delay bought critical time for reinforcements. The 7th Armored, 101st Airborne, and 10th Armored Divisions began funneling toward key crossroads. Maps at U.S. headquarters reflected a line, shifting westward under pressure, towns falling in succession, but the Americans' sacrifice offered a narrow window to regroup. The Ardennes, once peaceful, had become a corridor of fire, where civilians and soldiers alike paid the price for delaying the German timetable. The first towns had fallen, but their resistance laid the groundwork for the stands yet to come. While villages burned and lines buckled, a single atrocity near Malmedy would galvanize American troops and harden the resolve of those still fighting in the frozen Ardennes. December 17th, 1944. Near Bonnier, Malmedy, Belgium. As German spearheads surged through the Ardennes, a grim episode unfolded that would haunt American memory of the battle. A column of approximately 120 U.S. artillerymen and support troops from the 285th Field Artillery Observation Battalion encountered Kampfgruppe Piper, the armored vanguard of the 1st SS Panzer Division. The Americans, lightly armed and exposed on open roads, surrendered almost immediately. The prisoners were assembled in a frozen field, clustered under SS's watch. For a fleeting moment, routine seemed possible, until gunfire erupted. Machine guns swept across the snow. Men fell instantly or feigned death among the bodies of comrades. Some survivors recalled hearing pistol shots as SS soldiers moved among the wounded, finishing them at close range. 84 Americans died. The remainder scattered across fields and forests, crawling through icy ditches to reach safety, faces blackened by cold and blood. News of the massacre spread like wildfire. Orders emphasized the ruthless efficiency of SS units and the need for troops to prepare for enemy forces who might grant no quarter. The Ardennes was no longer just a battlefield. It had become a place of atrocity. Piper's armored column pressed on, burning villages and seizing supplies as speed remained paramount. Yet the brutality slowed them, leaving trails of bodies, consumed fuel, and disrupted momentum. German operational aims were momentarily overshadowed by the consequences of their own violence. For U.S. soldiers, Malmedy hardened resolve. Replacement troops entering the line understood that surrender could mean death. Survivor accounts circulated rapidly, reinforcing discipline and fortifying morale. American officers stressed the necessity of every stand, no matter how small, to impede German progress. Strategically, the massacre became a symbol of resistance. Eisenhower's headquarters recognized the Ardennes as a critical test of will, not merely a tactical engagement. By December 19th, the frozen field outside Malmedy remained littered with bodies, a grim record documented for later trials at Nuremberg. The atrocity would galvanize U.S. forces, shaping the determination to endure the coming days of relentless Ardennes fighting. As Malmedi's shadow lingered, attention turned to Bastogne, the crossroads at the center of the Ardennes, where American and German forces would soon collide in a race for survival and control. December 18th, 1944. Ardennes, Belgium. Bastogne, the hub of 7 highways, stood at the center of the Ardennes like the axle of a wheel. Whoever controlled it would dictate the flow of supplies, reinforcements, and communication. German armored columns recognized the town's strategic value, aiming to seize it before American forces could organize a proper defense. What had begun as a sudden offensive had become a race, speed, coordination, and endurance determining the outcome. The 101st Airborne Division, exhausted from prior campaigns in Holland and still refitting, received orders to move north. Trucks packed with paratroopers crawled through icy roads, headlights blacked out, engines straining against frozen mud and snow. Soldiers huddled under blankets, rifles across laps, uncertain of what awaited. Elements of the 10th Armored Division followed, Sherman tanks rattling across frozen terrain, engines coughing in the cold. For many, the name Bastogne meant little. Soon it would come to symbolize endurance under siege. German units, including Panzer Lehr and the 26th Volksgrenadier Division, pressed with momentum but not with certainty. Fuel reserves were limited, tanks burned through every mile, and prolonged delays risked the return of Allied air support. Orders were explicit: seize the town, cut the roads, and strike before Patton's Third Army could intervene. Inside Bastogne, American engineers began constructing hasty defenses. Roads were blocked with felled trees, mines, and improvised anti-tank obstacles. Artillery units dug into frozen fields, howitzers dragged by trucks and horses. Local civilians fled with carts laden with possessions, clashing with incoming convoys, attempting to funnel men and supplies into the town. Bastogne became a funnel of chaos, a junction of retreating refugees, advancing Germans, and hastily positioned American troops. Advance units of the 101st Airborne were already engaging German patrols by December 19th. Paratroopers from the 501st Regiment set up outposts in small villages, clashing in close-quarter firefights amid stone barns and hedgerows. Each delay forced Germans to deploy infantry rather than rushing armored columns, buying critical time. Patton's Third Army, pivoting north in one of the fastest redeployments of the war, aimed to relieve Bastogne, but terrain, weather, and enemy resistance made speed uncertain. Inside Bastogne, supply lines were tenuous. Ammunition was rationed. Medical units converted basements into aid stations, anticipating a siege that many believed inevitable. Roadblocks, snow, and exhausted soldiers transformed the town into a living fortress. Every street, house, and intersection would be contested in the coming days. As German pincers tightened, Bastogne's defenders braced for complete encirclement. The crossroads at the Ardennes' heart would either hold or fall, determining the trajectory of Hitler's last Western offensive. By December 20th, 1944, the German trap around Bastogne had nearly closed. The final American convoys trickled in under fire, headlights extinguished, drivers navigating by instinct and frozen breath. Once the last trucks rolled through, German armored columns severed southern roads. Bastogne was cut off. The 101st Airborne Division, elements of the 10th Armored, artillery battalions, and scattered infantry units were now sealed inside a ring of steel and snow. Pressure came from all directions. To the north, Volksgrenadiers pressed across frozen ridges, probing weak points. Panzer Lehr advanced from the south toward Marvy and Warden, aiming to split the American perimeter. Armored patrols circled east and west, searching for breaches. Each road became a battlefield, each farmhouse a strong point. The encirclement was nearly complete, and every hour tightened the noose. Inside Bastogne, General Anthony McAuliffe took command. Defensive sectors were drawn, with the 501st and 506th Parachute Infantry covering northern approaches, the 502nd securing the west, and the 327th Glider Infantry holding the southeast. Tank destroyers and Shermans from the 10th Armored were deployed to villages and crossroads, dug in for ambush. The defense was thin, but forests, ridges, and narrow roads amplified American firepower. The perimeter shrank daily. Patrols reported German armor massing beyond tree lines, engines growling in the frozen dawn. Civilians who remained took shelter in cellars with wounded paratroopers and ammunition crates. Food dwindled. Medical supplies were nearly exhausted. Frostbite claimed men as surely as bullets, with temperatures plunging and snow-filling trenches. Survival became a constant struggle. German artillery hammered Bastogne. Shells tore into the town square, igniting buildings. Horses panicked, wagons overturned, ammunition dumps detonated. American gunners replied with counter-battery fire, their howitzers thundering from orchards and fields. At night, the sky glowed from distant village fires, engine roars and tank treads echoing eerily across snow. By December 21st, the Germans had closed the last routes. The defenders were fully encircled. Radio intercepts confirmed it. Bastogne was a pocket, cut off from reinforcements. Patton's army was still moving north, but distance, terrain, and enemy strength delayed relief. The 101st would have to endure, holding crossroads until help arrived, or until men and ammunition were gone. For the Americans, the situation was clear. Surrounded, but not defeated. Defensive positions solidified. Artillery registered every road. Outposts braced for the coming storm. Bastogne had become a fortress, its garrison determined to resist. The first heavy assaults on Bastogne's perimeter began on December 21st, 1944. Dawn broke over snow-laden ridges as German artillery opened fire, shells screaming through the icy air. American paratroopers crouched in foxholes, teeth chattering, rifles clutched tight. Smoke from burning villages drifted across the frozen fields, blurring lines between forest and farmland. Volksgrenadiers advanced in waves, rifles slung, machine guns rattling, driven forward by veteran officers and the momentum of armor. At Noville, the 506th Parachute Infantry Regiment bore the brunt. German tanks clanked across open terrain, their massive silhouettes silhouetted against gray skies. Bazooka teams dashed between barns and hedgerows, waiting until armored targets filled their sights. Some Shermans of the 10th Armored fired until their barrels glowed, then fell to flames and enemy fire, burning as dark monuments in crossroads and fields. Every delay mattered, slowing German progress, buying hours of precious reinforcement time. To the south, near Marvy, the 327th Glider Infantry faced Panzer Lehr's assault. Half-tracks disgorged infantry into snow-choked fields. Machine guns raked defensive positions, and the first heavy assaults on Bastogne's perimeter began on December 21st, 1944. Dawn broke over snow-laden ridges as German artillery opened fire, shells screaming through the icy air. American paratroopers crouched in foxholes, teeth chattering, rifles clutched tight. Smoke from burning villages drifted across the frozen fields, blurring lines between forest and farmland. Volksgrenadiers advanced in waves, rifles slung, machine guns rattling, driven forward by veteran officers and the momentum of armor. At Noville, the 506th Parachute Infantry Regiment bore the brunt. German tanks clanked across open terrain, their massive silhouettes silhouetted against gray skies. Bazooka teams dashed between barns and hedgerows, waiting until armored targets filled their sights. Some Shermans of the 10th Armored fired until their barrels glowed, then fell to flames and enemy fire, burning as dark monuments in crossroads and fields. Every delay mattered, slowing German progress, buying hours of precious reinforcement time. To the south, near Marvy, the 327th Glider Infantry faced Panzerlehr's assault. Half-tracks disgorged infantry into snow-choked fields. Machine guns raked defensive positions, and mortars landed with deadly precision. Artillery blasted open snowbanks, tossing frozen earth and men alike. American soldiers fought relentlessly, turning every farmhouse into a bastion. Grenades, entrenching tools, and bare fists replaced dwindling ammunition. The fight became intimate, brutal, and unforgiving. Civilian buildings were battlegrounds. Stone farmhouses transformed into firing nests, changing hands multiple times. Each structure contested, each street soaked with snow and blood. Medics dragged wounded to makeshift aid stations, using civilian basements as hospitals. Morphine, bandages, and food ran low, rationed to bare necessity. Morale was tested yet fortified by determination. Bastogne could not fall, not while even a single paratrooper remained alive. German commanders realized Bastogne would not collapse with a single strike. Orders shifted to tighter encirclement, artillery barrages, and relentless pressure. Each assault probed weaknesses, forced rotations, and consumed manpower. Inside the town, officers reminded soldiers of stakes. Bastogne was the key to the Ardennes. Its loss would unravel the American front. By nightfall, on December 22nd, Bastogne's perimeter remained unbroken. Fires burned in the distance, snow stained black and red, artillery shells still falling across ridges. German troops regrouped for renewed assault, unaware that American resilience had turned a pocket into a fortress. The siege had begun in earnest, with days of relentless fighting looming over frozen streets and desperate defenders. As snow continued to fall, the defenders knew each hour meant more than survival. It meant controlling Bastogne's roads. Supplies were scarce, reinforcements distant, but the Americans prepared to hold at all costs, turning every street and farm into a weaponized barricade against the tightening German noose. By December 23, 1944, Bastogne had become a fortress in the snowbound Ardennes. American paratroopers dug in along every approach, turning narrow streets, stone walls, and frozen farmyards into defensive choke points. The 101st Airborne Division, joined by remnants of the 10th Armored, fortified intersections where 7 major roads converged. Each crossroad became a lifeline for supplies and a target for German assaults. The German strategy was simple: isolate Bastogne, cut supply lines, and break morale through relentless pressure. Artillery barrages pummeled the perimeter, tearing roofs, shattering walls, and sending plumes of snow and rubble into the air. Infantry probes followed, supported by tanks cautiously advancing through fields and narrow lanes. In some sectors, German soldiers used captured American weapons and uniforms to infiltrate positions, forcing defenders to scrutinize every figure moving through fog and smoke. Inside Bastogne, rationing became critical. Food was limited to half rations, ammunition counted with obsessive care. Medics improvised with civilian clothing for bandages, and basements turned into temporary hospitals. Snow and ice clogged trenches, frozen limbs, slowed movement, and exhaustion pushed soldiers to the brink. Officers rotated units constantly, ensuring no position was left empty, no flank uncovered. Survival demanded vigilance and sacrifice. The townspeople, though terrified, assisted where possible. They guided medics to wounded in hidden cellars, retrieved supplies from abandoned warehouses, and warned of German probes through back alleys. Civilians became part of the defense, quietly shaping the battlefield in ways the Americans could not have achieved alone. Their courage, like that of the soldiers, was tested with each passing hour. German attacks grew more coordinated. Panzer divisions attempted to punch through the west and north, while infantry units probed gaps along southern ridges. Artillery softened defenses before each assault, yet the defenders adapted. Bazooka teams ambushed tanks at choke points. Mortar crews registered blind, firing in arcs to catch enemy formations moving behind ridges. Each engagement, though costly, delayed the German timetable, frustrating commanders who relied on speed and surprise. By nightfall, Bastogne had endured another day. Streets were scarred, houses gutted, and snow churned with mud, ice, and blood. Yet every crossroad remained under American control. For the defenders, holding the town meant more than survival. It meant denying the Germans the logistical hub crucial to their Ardennes offensive. As darkness fell over Bastogne, supply convoys faced the perilous task of reaching the trapped garrison. Every truck, sled, and mule became a lifeline, carrying food, ammunition, and hope into the heart of the siege. The coming days would test endurance, ingenuity, and courage beyond anything the soldiers had faced so far. By December 24th, 1944, the Ardennes sky had thickened with dense clouds, hiding the battlefield in an unbroken gray. For weeks, fog and snow had concealed German movements, giving them initial advantage. Now nature itself began to shift in favor of the Americans. Overnight, heavy snowfall blanketed the region, turning frozen mud into a treacherous quagmire and filling roads with drifts that slowed armored columns to a crawl. Visibility dropped to mere yards, making coordinated assaults nearly impossible. The Luftwaffe, which had provided intermittent air support in previous campaigns, was grounded entirely. Bombers and fighters could not navigate the storm, leaving German units isolated and vulnerable. American artillery, while still constrained by fog, began to gain indirect control over advancing formations. Observation posts atop ridges spotted tank silhouettes only moments before they became engaged, allowing sharpshooters and bazooka teams to target weakened points. Snow, once a silent killer for the defenders, now hindered the aggressors. German fuel shortages compounded the problem. Panzer columns, stalled as engines, choked in the cold. Frozen radiators forcing crews to improvise with torches and antifreeze substitutes. Supply trucks bogged down in drifts, leaving infantry exposed at the front. With artillery pounding their stalled armor and paratroopers controlling key crossroads, German commanders found their momentum faltering. The offensive that had thundered across the Ardennes in a matter of days now ground to a disorganized halt. Inside Bastogne, American morale received a boost. Troops, though exhausted, cheered as reconnaissance patrols reported slowed enemy advances. Engineers cleared snow from trenches, maintained weapons frozen by frost, and reinforced positions that German units had repeatedly probed. Medical teams had more time to treat frostbite, while supply officers could stretch limited rations, knowing the enemy would move slower than expected. Nature had become an ally in the absence of reinforcements. The Americans also adjusted tactics. Small patrols moved under cover of snowfall to ambush exposed units. Booby traps were camouflaged by fresh drifts, and mortar crews shifted fire onto roads where stalled tanks clustered. Even minor actions now had outsized impact because German formations could not maneuver quickly. Each halted column was a reprieve, each stalled advance a victory bought with patience and grit. By Christmas Eve, the weather had altered the dynamics of the Battle of the Bulge. What had been a rapid German thrust now faced delays, confusion, and attrition. Supplies, communications, and coordination were all compromised. For the Americans, the storm was not merely a reprieve, it was an opportunity to fortify Bastogne further, rotate exhausted units, and await Patton's Third Army maneuver from the south. While snow blanketed the Ardennes, German commanders struggled to regain control. The freezing landscape and relentless American resistance foreshadowed a critical turning point in the battle, one that would test endurance, strategy, and resolve on both sides. By the morning of December 25, 1944, Bastogne remained encircled, its defenders cold, hungry, and weary, but still unbroken. Reports filtered in that General Patton's Third Army had pivoted north with extraordinary speed. Columns of tanks, half-tracks, and trucks rumbled through snow-laden roads, headlights dimmed, engines straining, bridging gaps that seemed impassable in the frozen Ardennes. The Americans inside Bastogne clung to hope, as distant engine roars hinted at salvation. Supply convoys faced peril from every direction. German artillery and snipers targeted exposed vehicles, turning frozen crossroads into kill zones. Ice-coated roads doubled the risk. One miscalculated turn could send a truck careening into a ditch, lost in a drift, and vulnerable to attack. Engineers in the lead detonated mines and cleared obstacles under intermittent fire, often with snow up to their knees. Each mile gained was measured not in distance, but in lives preserved. Inside Bastogne, paratroopers coordinated with approaching columns. Scouts navigated blind roads through forests, marking safe routes for relief units. Ammunition, rations, and medical supplies, scarce for days, finally trickled in. Morale surged with each arriving truck, though soldiers quickly distributed resources to those still holding exposed positions. Letters and small comforts carried in these convoys reminded men that the outside world had not forgotten them. German forces noticed the shift. Panzer columns that had stalled in snow began to withdraw, aware that the American line could soon be reinforced. Stubborn infantry units faced increasing resistance from well-supplied positions, as artillery fire from Bastogne could now be coordinated more effectively with incoming forward observers. Delays stretched enemy logistics to their breaking point. By evening, the first relief units had linked with the besieged paratroopers. Medical teams evacuated the worst frostbite and wounded, while fresh troops reinforced perimeter points under threat of assault. Bastogne was not yet free, but the siege had been partially broken. Every mile covered by Patton's convoys was a lifeline, a tangible demonstration that rapid maneuver and logistics could alter the course of a desperate battle. With Bastogne partially reinforced, both sides reassessed strategy. The Germans, still trapped by weather and logistics, prepared for final attempts to break American resistance. The next phase would test endurance, coordination, and the limits of both armies' capabilities. By December the 26th, 1944, the weather had cleared slightly, revealing the full extent of the Ardennes battlefield. American commanders seized the opportunity. fresh units from Patton's Third Army and remnants of the 10th Armored began coordinated counterattacks to relieve Bastogne and reclaim lost ground. Every movement was calculated, merging intelligence from scouts, radio intercepts, and aerial reconnaissance whenever clouds permitted. The counterattacks were not sweeping advances, but precise, brutal engagements. Tank destroyers ambushed German armor along choke points, while infantry infiltrated villages to reclaim streets and houses. Shermans backed by artillery pounded enemy positions, using frozen roads as predictable paths to funnel German units into kill zones. The combination of surprise and concentrated firepower began to blunt the German momentum that had seemed unstoppable days earlier. Small units became decisive. Patrols of paratroopers and engineers moved under snow-laden trees to flank enemy positions. Mines and improvised explosives slowed armored columns, forcing Germans to commit infantry into exposed terrain. Every German advance that had previously overwhelmed weak defenses was now contested fiercely, casualties mounting on both sides. Inside Bastogne, defenders coordinated counterfire with approaching American forces. Artillery observers guided barrages, hitting assembly points and cutting supply lines for the encircling enemy. Morale surged as letters, rations, and reinforcements arrived, strengthening both physical and psychological resolve. Soldiers who had endured frostbite, hunger, and continuous assault now pressed forward with renewed purpose. The Germans, though still formidable, faced a precarious situation. Fuel shortages, exhausted men, and the narrowing encirclement forced them to adjust tactics. Their attempts to push forward were met with ambushes, sniper fire, and precise artillery strikes. Communication lines were overrun in places, creating confusion among unit commands. By nightfall, small towns that had recently fallen were being reclaimed. Every village, every road, and every crossroad became a scene of violent close-quarters fighting. Counterattacks bought time and space, but they came at a heavy cost. American commanders understood that only relentless pressure and coordination could turn the tide fully, setting the stage for the decisive phases of the Ardennes campaign. As December 27th approached, both sides braced for intensified clashes, knowing that the initiative was fragile and the winter-stricken terrain as much an adversary as the enemy itself. German forces, advancing under low visibility, encountered fierce resistance. Panzer-Lehr units engaged Shermans in close-range firefights, often losing vehicles to well-placed bazooka shots and anti-tank guns. Infantry attempted to infiltrate buildings, but met with determined paratroopers, forcing them into repeated assaults under artillery and mortar fire. Every hour of delay further slowed their timetable toward Bastogne and beyond. Supply remained a pressing concern. Roads clogged with abandoned vehicles forced engineers to clear paths under enemy fire. Ammunition ran low, rations dwindled, and frostbite took a toll on soldiers who had spent days in sub-zero temperatures. American commanders improvised. Truck convoys were rerouted, reserves repositioned, and artillery fire carefully rationed to cover retreating units or protect critical sectors. By late December 21st, Saint-Advith had not fallen, but the town was battered. German units controlled outer approaches, forcing American defenders into a shrinking perimeter. Counter-battery fire from American artillery disrupted German formations, while patrols harassed supply lines. Civilians, trapped in damaged homes, sought shelter alongside soldiers, turning the town into a chaotic mix of survival and defense. Strategically holding Saint, with delayed German plans to link southern thrusts with central attacks on Bastogne. The delay allowed Patton's forces to close in from the south and east, reinforcing Bastogne and stabilizing the southern front. Every hour bought by American defenders was a victory in itself, demonstrating the interplay of terrain, logistics, and relentless human endurance. As the Ardennes froze under winter storms, the battle for Saint-Invite set the stage for a broader Allied counteroffensive, promising bitter engagements along every major route, while German momentum began to falter. By December 22nd, the Ardennes had become a battleground defined as much by weather as by men and machines. Snow fell relentlessly, draping forests, roads, and towns in heavy white. Freezing rain glazed every surface, turning streets into treacherous sheets of ice. For both sides, movement slowed dramatically. German panzers, though powerful, ground forward over icy roads, treads slipping and engines straining. American supply convoys struggled to bring ammunition, food, and medical aid through the same terrain. Every mile became a test of endurance and engineering. Air support, a decisive advantage for the Allies in prior campaigns, was all but neutralized. Low clouds, heavy fog, and snowstorms grounded reconnaissance and close air support. Observers huddled in foxholes or atop ridges, squinting through flurries for signs of enemy movement. Supply drops to isolated units in Bastogne and other pockets were impossible, leaving paratroopers dependent on what they carried or what they could scavenge from the surrounding villages. Fuel shortages emerged as a critical problem for German armored columns. Panzer units burned through precious reserves on icy roads, frequently halting for hours to refuel. When columns stalled, American artillery teams exploited the pause, targeting exposed tanks and support vehicles. Likewise, frozen rivers and destroyed bridges complicated movement for both sides, forcing engineers to construct makeshift crossings under fire. Communication became a constant challenge. Radios froze or malfunctioned in the cold. Wired connections snapped under the weight of snow or artillery shock waves. Messengers on foot or sleds became the lifeline for orders and coordination, exposing them to sniper fire, frostbite, and exhaustion. Units often operated on fragmentary intelligence, improvising as the fog and storm hid enemy positions and movements. For soldiers, the strain was physical and psychological. Marches through snowdrifts consumed strength faster than bullets, and sleep became sporadic. Frostbite, hunger, and fatigue gnawed at readiness. Commanders had to make ruthless decisions about ration allocation, rotation of troops, and prioritizing which positions could be held or abandoned. Even minor mistakes, misjudged ice, a delayed convoy, a stuck tank, carried lethal consequences. By evening, it was clear that the weather was an enemy as formidable as any German division. Supply lines stretched to breaking points, reinforcements struggled through drifts, and isolated units faced the constant risk of being overrun without hope of relief. Yet the same storms that hindered the Allies also slowed German momentum, creating brief windows to regroup, fortify positions, and plan counterattacks. By the close of December 22nd, the Ardennes had become a graveyard for certainty. Men fought the cold as fiercely as they fought the enemy, and supply lines groaned under impossible weight. Yet in that brutal stillness, opportunity stirred. The Germans, stalled and burning, fuel they could not replace, saw their timetable unravel. The Americans, battered but unbroken, clung to every ridge and crossroads, knowing that time itself was shifting in their favor. The storm would not last forever.